Welcome to the Redemption Podcast Show. I'm U.S. Army veteran and poetic human John Krotec.
And I am a former professional fighter, the champion soul, Jason Freebird Freeman. In a sincere effort to help others and to set some records straight, we share our personal stories and scripture and offer real solutions to overcoming the challenges of life.
We appreciate you being here. And remember, the truth
shall set you free.
Welcome back to another episode of the Redemption File Podcast. I'm here this morning with a hot cup of Java, but also more importantly with my co-host Jason Freebird Freeman, who is the champion soul, the decide to fight guy, right? And then I'm John Krotec, the poetic human. We appreciate you coming back for another episode. You know, this is all new to us. We're not professional broadcasters or any of that, but we do have a lot of heart, right? Yeah. So, you know, today's episode is one that has been out there for a long time. Thousands and thousands of people have asked this question. And I've kind of got a different take on it. What we're going to do today is we're going to go over some of these quotes by Jason's grandfather, and we'll kind of just look into them. But, you know, before we go there, the question is, was your grandfather, Charlie, known to many, Charles Manson Sr., crazy? And I, you know, we've been working together for 2.5 years. You know, we met each other through a mutual friend, and you've been able to share with me, Jason, over that time, some recordings from your grandfather when he was in jail.
Yes.
But also some letters. You've shared some letters and you've shared personal stories that not everybody has heard. And, you know, I've kind of got a different take on that question, or a different answer maybe. But let me just first say that your grandfather, like so many of us, was not a saint, right? He surrounded himself with some really dangerous people. And he also did some illegal things. You know, that's an understatement. But he was involved in some stuff, you know, and caught up in the times, right? The psychedelic movement of the 60s and Helter Skelter and the Beatles and all that madness in Southern California. It was an interesting time, to say the least.
Yeah.
But there's also, you know, one thing that we have to qualify here is that there are emotional disorders that people have. Some of them affect people in a bad way, and some of them people deal with and get over them. But everybody that I've heard that we all have emotional baggage. And what I've learned about your grandfather was he came from correct me if I'm wrong, but he came from a long line of criminal behaviors, you know, people that were involved in stuff. And he just, you know, he kept falling through the cracks. You know, he would get in trouble and then he would fall through the cracks. And I think, wasn't he at Boys Town at one time?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then the system, and I know this from my own personal experience, you know, stay away from attorneys, stay away from the law, do the right thing, because once you get caught in that attorney legal world, it gets to be like a black hole.
Yeah.
You know, it's a rabbit hole.
Never ends. It never ends. I mean, heck, I look back at my childhood, and even though I wasn't a bad kid, I still got in trouble. There was still mischief that was going on that and I took the rap for a lot of my friends, kind of like what my grandfather was doing, trying to take the rap for everybody.
Yeah, you know, and I'm just the opposite of you, and I'll admit it here. You know, I was involved in some really interesting things when I was much younger over the years and hung out with some interesting characters. And I was the guy that never really got caught. And when I did, it was never really, you know, it wasn't a serious crime. You know, I'd get my wrist slapped or my hand slapped, and then it would be moved on. And thank God I grew up and got out of that. But some of my friends, did jail time, and some of my friends did some really crazy stuff that I wouldn't even dream of doing. So, when we start saying we're a saint, or we haven't done questionable things in our past, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's necessarily true. Everybody's saying that, but regardless, the realities of prison are real. And of course, we talked to Richard Caruso, who was a prison guard of your dad's, and they told us some interesting stories that he's never let out of the bag. And people get
Yeah.
shanked, which is when you get cut by a homemade weapon or something. People get beat up. There's gangs and
Yeah.
there's violence in prison. It's not a Sunday school outing. It's prison, and you get sent there because you did something, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's also people in prison that would like to make a name for themselves, be a tough guy. Oh, holy heck, if I'm the guy that could take out Charles Manson, what does that say? So let's just
Yeah.
say I'm a person that's not really that violent, or a person that's got some soft areas in my heart. It would seem to me you could act crazy just to stay out of what they call in prison the general population. Because Charles Manson was not a big guy, and there's some huge hombres in jail that I would not want to mess with. These people have
Yeah.
teardrop tattoos. They're
They would turn him into a taco.
sons of Satan. These yes. And so, I've seen the videos of your grandfather. They're out there of him acting just like he's bat poop crazy.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah. Facial figures. I mean, that would make um,
swastikas, yeah.
Donald Trump quiver.
And so that's what this persona that was projected by the powers that be, right? All during that time. And that's another episode about the psychedelic era and why would the federal government want to quash it. But that's for another day. We're not we're not leaking a conspiracy here. It's an honest question. But so let's go over some of the things. But anyhow, but like I said, I've heard those tapes. I've had letters shared with me, and I just have a
Yeah.
different take.
Yeah.
I yeah.
Is is Charles or was Charles Manson crazy? I mean, there's no there's no way to say no. There's no way to say, well, there's a lot of ways to say yeah. And one one of those that I was just reading on, John, was Charles Manson invented God. So this is one of the top 10 from watchmojo.com. So this talks about if if God created everything, who created God? Well, apparently we have the head of the Manson family to thank for that. During this episode, uncovering interview, Charles Manson said that God was his best friend. Okay, well, you could take things out of context and call that crazy, but as a Christian, I know that God's my best friend. And then it goes into let's see, he said God is his best friend, having created him. So they're saying that he said that he created God. And yeah, and then upon being asked if he himself is Jesus Christ, which I'm not sure why that would be a question back then, maybe because of his long hair. Um, Manson explained that there are actually many Jesuses all over the world. Okay, it is believed by some that God appears in many different forms, but Manson Manson's assessment probably isn't what most people have in mind. Now, if you're a believer, if you believe that Jesus Christ resides in every single person who is a believer, then you know that Christ is on the inside of you, God is on the inside of you, and not that I'm explaining anything any different than what the next believer would say, even though my grandfather is the one that said these things, um, quote unquote.
Yeah, again, first of all, perception is perception. Why certain questions are asked is one thing, and we really don't know, even though that question, we really don't know why people say what they say, and it could be a reflection of who knows. But I know that when we talk about, was he crazy, even some of these answers might have been given to give it the appearance that he was crazy. There's another one out there, and here's your grandfather saying this: everybody's got someone to blame because no one wants to look inside themselves. That's a true statement. So the reporter says, what do you see when you look inside yourself? And your grandfather answers, when I look inside myself, I see everything. I see all. I've seen the good, bad, the evil. I see the whole thing. How much evil is there? Well, why ask that question? Why not ask how much good is there? But it seems like they're always baiting him. And then he answers, as much as you see. Then the reporter says, what do you see? And your grandfather is laughing. He says, all of it, right down to peaks you haven't touched yet, dreams you haven't dreamed, and worlds you haven't conquered. The mind is endless. You put me in a dark, solitary cell, and to you, that's the end. To me, it's the beginning. There's a universe in there. There's a world in there. I'm free.
Yep.
I mean,
How's that crazy?
that's yeah. Well, and that's even. I'm not a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, but just the framing of some of these questions, and that is a pretty open and honest answer to a question, to a baited question. So it tells me there's a mind of somebody that's not as crazy as they're making him out to be. And he's given them an honest answer from the heart.
And then, of course, it'd be the next question will twist and alter what he would say or what he did say to contradict what he said. I've seen that multiple times.
Yeah. And then, 20 years after the crime, this reporter in another interview, they were always interviewing him, right? This reporter says, people look at you today, 20 years later, and they still have no idea what you're about. Tell me in a sentence who you are. The grandfather answers, nobody. I'm nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And in a straight razor if you get close to me. That's a pretty creative mind. As a poet, that's pretty poetic. And he's saying I'm nobody. I'm just this guy. I can be anything you want me to be. But in prison, if you get close to me, I'm going to cut you. I mean, yeah, that's not crazy. I mean, again, we're dissecting these right off these websites, right? And then I see the one about him inventing God, and Helter Skelter, the song Helter Skelter by the Beatles that Bugliosi wrote the book about and made probably hundreds of thousands of dollars off of it. And not all of it was correct.
Well, John,
a lot of redacted
the,
stuff.
From the cat's mouth, from coming from people that know my grandfather, know that the Helter Skelter in the song in the Beatles was not what my grandfather catered to or cared to listen to. He was not into that music. And I wouldn't come on here and say he wasn't if I didn't already know. Like we already know that Helter Skelter was created just to make that book and to seal the case off. But I'm not saying anything they focused on was not their truth, but I just know from that song and from the Beatles that my grandfather had no interest. He didn't.
Yeah, well, even Helter Skelter, the song, listen to it. Take some time, listen to it. And he was explaining it in yet another interview, and here was your grandfather's explanation of Helter Skelter. Mine, 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 mine. Man, your mind is going a billion miles an hour. Woo! That's what I call confusion. That's Helter Skelter. That's not
Oh,
a insane answer. I mean, he's being interviewed. They're asking him to explain this song that's been connected to the deeds that these people did, and he's saying a true statement. Everybody's mind is going a million miles a minute. There's a look at the world today, how confused everybody is, and all he's saying is that's Helter Skelter. Everybody's minds are going a million miles a minute. Gosh, let's take another one. Let's take another one, Jason. I want you to take
all right,
one.
all right.
Um,
Let me grab this real quick. One that spoke to me. Let's see. Well, a couple things I want to add to this one here is this is number 9 on what is it? WatchMojo.com. And I want to relate to a couple things that him and I talked about. Um, the things that I would share and I would talk about were different than what he would talk about, but it still covered the same thing. Like I would talk about liberty, family, freedom, and finances, where my grandfather he would talk about justice, freedom, and while claiming that he just wanted to have a fair trial and the Constitution,
which he did not get, by the way.
right? And the Constitution was altered to fit the court's needs and not to help protect the innocent who claim innocence. So um, that, and if you go back through the case, you'll see, and you do some reading back into the court files to even recent um, court documentations. You'll see, you'll see. But what I was getting at here was Charles Manson was convicted of first degree murder, but he did not directly kill even one of the victims for whom he went to jail for. Rather, he ordered the members of this quite unique family to carry out the Tate LaBianca murders. So when Manson told whoever this was in this interview that he never killed anyone, there's arguably some accuracy to his words. However, Manson's follow-up statement makes about as much sense as Helter Skelter, and Manson implying that he can kill people using his own mind, or that he can get into other people's heads to influence them to commit murder, question mark. In any case, it's nothing short of bonkers.
Well, that's another. Let's all when we look at these quotes, and one thing that Jason and I are doing, we're pulling them out, and if you listen to the whole conversations, you'll find that a lot of these quotes by your grandfather were taken out of context. You almost have to take the whole conversation to see exactly what's being said, what's being asked, and why they're asking it. There was another interview where he said that slaying someone is like walking into the drugstore, right? Don't know the exact date of it, but it's out
Sounds
there.
crazy. Yeah, that
You
sounds
know,
crazy.
he said, if I wanted to slay somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It would be just like walking to the drugstore. Okay. That's not saying he's going to do it. What he's doing is he's telling you the mindset of somebody that might kill somebody. If when I listened to that entire interview, it was it was not an insane statement at all, but it was framed in such a way to make it look like he was crazy and deranged. And again, we could go on and on and on. We don't want to take up too much time if you're still with us. But I would, if I was a small guy and I was the topic of the town, the crimes that I had been associated with, the people that I had surrounded myself with, and I ended up at Corcoran State Prison, which is where I think he went. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to get in with the general population because I knew as a criminal myself who had been to jail, I knew what the things that happen out there in the general population. I think I would be acting crazy too, because I would not want to get out there because little old me, John, Poetic Human, would get shanked in a New York minute. So
It's a defensive mechanism, right? Right. So like if you got to find a way to protect yourself, as far as I know, from when I grew up, you don't want to mess with a crazy guy or a naked guy. You run from both of them. That's
yeah, good point. But even the two, you're in prison. What's going to take over? Fear. Like you just said, there's a defense mechanism going on, and you can't.
yeah.
You show fear in prison, you're going to be somebody's anyhow.
Boy,
Yeah, you're going to
boy.
be you're going to be passed around. You're going to be beat up. You're going to be picked on. So you can't show fear. So what else can you show? Insanity. The insanity will keep you isolated and locked up. And if that's not enough to make you go crazy, then I don't know what is. And you shared with me 5 hours of recordings of your grandfather. And
Yeah.
there's stuff in there that anybody that's locked up for that amount of time might say. But there's also a lot of stuff in there that anybody that's sane might say. I have had
Mhm.
relatives that have had schizophrenia,
Yeah.
and as long as they're on their meds, they do great. It's probably too
Yeah.
much information, but when they're not, I'm not one of them. But when you, again, when we all the human organism deals with emotions all the time, and your grandfather, your mom told me, and other people sources have told me that he came out of this long line of criminal behaviors, or long line of people in the family who had committed petty crimes and that.
Mhm.
And then he
Mhm.
gets to California, the wild 60s that we mentioned, and he has the power he has charisma. He's actually hanging out with some pretty influential people at the beginning when he first got to California. But then it's like a kid in a candy store. Everybody's doing psychedelics. He's got a lot of women around him, pretty runaways, and all this stuff going on. But there's also people in that family that have criminal backgrounds themselves. And some of them violent criminal backgrounds where they were involved in drug deals and, you know, the Bobby Henson case and all this other stuff going on. So he was all wrapped up in it. And
All of it.
we all know how it was framed. All I want to say is not everything we've been told, not everything that we've seen is the truth. And when we talk about
Hmm.
redemption and we talk about things like the truth, we know that the truth.
Shall set you free.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget, visit Jason's website, jasonfreebirdfreeman.com. And if you decide to fight it out, take his Decide to Fight online program. to turn your life around, to help you overcome the challenges of your life, the traumas that you may not be dealing with. And if you want to write it out, visit johntkrotec.com and take the HEARTSCRIBES course. Fight it out or write it out. It's your choice. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Redemption Podcast Show. We hope you got some wisdom out of it. Don't forget, the truth
shall set you free.